go. Awesome. Rock on, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the February 2025 installment of the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. With me today is Jordan Sazzi. This is going to be an amazing presentation. She's going to be talking about build a robust backup strategy with the power of automation. And I can tell you right now, I love this topic because some of the environments that we're in are massive. And if you don't audit or if you don't automate anything, good luck. I got one environment, no exaggeration, 171,000 SQL servers. You're not touching anything manually. So with that, I'll turn this over to Jordan.
I believe it. Thank you so much, David. Like David said, I'm Jordan Sassy. I've spent around 13-ish years as a database administrator. Much of those years, I was a consultant full time for a very, very large global MSP. I'm recently working at the Boston Beer Company. The reason I chose this topic in particular is just because of how many times as a consultant I've been called in to assist a client after something is already broken. Most of the time, there is at least some semblance of a backup strategy, but whether or not it's working as intended or working at all, or maybe just missing critical pieces, it was very clear that the SQL backup situation was fragile. And more often than not, they had no defined policies or strategies or even documentation for any kind of successful full disaster recovery scenario. So basically, I've just had to tell far, far too many people that some or even all of their data is gone. And that's not something that you want to have to tell a client or your boss, and it doesn't feel very good. Also, because several years of my experience is from consulting and contracting, this content is going to be intentionally a little bit more open-ended or flexible simply because of the nature of contracting where you're not necessarily going to be the decision maker. You might have the ability to suggest certain tools or combinations of tools, but at the end of the day, it's not really completely up to you. Or you might have a limited budget or no budget at all. So I'm hoping to give you the tools and flexibility to balance your own or your clients' requirements optimally with the things that you can control. So let's get started. Today, we're going to take a look at common backup methodologies for automating your SQL Server backups and go over how these methods maybe can be improved on or augmented by additional completely free tooling. There's some great paid tools out there as well. Don't have any problem with those, but I don't want you to feel limited by your tooling or budget. So I wanted to show you at least one working solution that only uses free tools and a combination of free tools at that. We will look at a case study for a demo environment and discuss what they're doing correctly and what maybe could use improvement. We'll also cover how to collaborate with your sysadmin or your storage teams to combine the tooling that you have access to, such as third-party snapshots that are really, really popular that maximize redundancy while minimizing your storage costs. That's really, really important. Next, we're going to introduce our case study. And for this, we will take a brief detour into PowerShell modules. If you're newer to PowerShell, don't stress. We'll keep it super simple and straightforward today. If you're newer to PowerShell, I've got another session coming up in June that is more dedicated solely to PowerShell for SQL Server. But I'll also be leaving you with some resources at the end of the session. But for today, again, we're just going to be looking at PowerShell modules built for SQL Server management, as well as widely used, freely available scripted solutions, and look at how they can be used together to build standardized automated backup solutions, as well as the monitoring of our backup tasks. Once we have covered designing our case study's initial backup solution, we'll cover automation of backup verification and restore testing. This is going to be done using PowerShell modules as well, introduced in the previous section, and then we're going to expand on that a little bit. Finally, we're going to go over how you can set up automated generation of restore scripts that you will need in the event of a total loss, because your .back files, your database backups are not necessarily going to be all you're going to need in the event of total loss. So to summarize, in this course, I'm going to go over the use of various tools and combinations of solutions to show you how you can extend on your current tooling to achieve your disaster preparedness goals without necessarily having to purchase any new tools. Although if you have paid tools, these solutions should fit in nicely with what you've already got. I'm not claiming that this is going to be the best solution for every case scenario, just that it is a working, flexible set of solutions to cover many diverse user cases. Let's start with some basics around good backup hygiene and general strategy. You should be taking consistent backups. You can't have automation without some consistency. Take consistent backups. This means multiple things. Is every instance going to be able to adhere perfectly to one set of policies and schedules? No, not necessarily. But if you're taking backups on several different machines, like the thousands of instances David was mentioning earlier, consistency anywhere that you can use it is going to be key for you. Use the same tools across your SQL instances wherever you can, and keep a living document. This can even be an automated document. You can query most of this information of all of your SQL estates, backup schedules, mechanisms, policies, retention policies. Keep this all together somewhere that you can access readily and keep it updated. Make sure that you are complementing and not competing with third-party snapshot backups. Taking application-aware backups and also native SQL Server backups can break your backup chain, which is especially difficult to navigate with full recovery mode databases and, say, transaction log or differential backups. Get together with your sysadmins and plan out how your backups are kept short and long-term, locally or offsite, ideally some combination of both. Get with your sysadmins and learn what tools they're using. Talk to them about the specific tools at your disposal and really take some time to learn more about how these tools work. Maybe it's something that you can have access to and get some visibility in yourself. Keep yourself in the loop with any sort of vendor communication so that you know when something changes. Don't duplicate backups. You don't want to bloat your machine snapshots. You're never going to restore that 400 gig temp DB disk, so don't include it in your snapshots. But also don't neglect the rest of your system database backups, even in your dev environments. I had a client who had a dev environment not start after patching due to what turned out to be a really simple missing permissions issue in the master database. But in the process of troubleshooting, we found out that they had no backups at all because it was just dev. So why would we need backups? The devs were working on something kind of important and they really wanted their environment back up ASAP. And if we had needed to restore the master database just to get the dev environment back up, we would not have been able to because we had no backups. Sure, we could rebuild from scratch, but that's hours of duplicated work that we would not need to be spending if we just keep our system DBs handy. They're so small, they're so easy to keep, and then the developers don't have to redo any of the work in progress. Regularly run checks to ensure that your backups are actually configured the way that you intend for them to be running. This sounds really simple and straightforward, but as a consultant, as a contractor, I have seen literally hundreds of database, say, schedules named something like every 20 minutes, but then the schedule runs every 20 hours or maybe every 20 days, or it's disabled and documentation wasn't updated. But we're all technically, I love to say, working as configured, right? I've seen retention policies that Eat the full backups several days before taking the next full backup, and just folders with dozens of transaction log backup files that can't actually be restored to anything because you've already deleted the full backup that they'd need to be restored on top of. I've seen people take once a day full backups and differential backups at the same time and no other time. These aren't things that you want to have to explain to your boss or to your client or to your stakeholders when you're scrambling to restore data. Speaking of stakeholders, regularly meet with your stakeholders to make sure that you're able to meet your restore time objectives and your restore point objectives and your retention goals. This might mean once a year, but as people come and go from your job, these policies and the intentions behind them can easily get lost in set it and forget it land. Make sure for each environment you are set up to meet your actual best and worst case RTO and RPOs, which if you've used Brent Ozar's first responder kit, you can actually get a rough idea of your RTO and RPO using his, I think it's called SP Blitz backups, which is pretty nice. There are some caveats to this. I wouldn't take that as gold because the actual restore time and your actual effort involved is going to be a little bit different, but that's a great place to start, SP Blitz backups. Make sure if you're the sole database administrator, you factor in time for potentially having to restore multiple environments yourself. In order of priority, that should be determined in advance. In order of priority, that should be determined in advance. Make a list of all your SQL instances, order them by priority that you're confirming with your stakeholders, and work out what your actual restore time is. This is a critical part of your DR playbook. Hopefully, if you do have to do disaster recovery, it's just going to be for a single failed server. However, with the popularity of virtualized servers combined with the current cybersecurity climate, I would actually say it's probably more likely than not that your first real DR experience is going to be larger than a single server. I'm thinking about something like ransomware. It's becoming so much easier and cheaper to attack and so much harder and more expensive to prevent against attacks on your company and your company's data. And that's typically a much larger outage than 1 or 2 SQL servers. So don't wait for everything to break all at once to figure out which one of your instances was the most important. Be flexible where you need to be to meet your backup needs. This is a little bit more consultant specific, but is true for everyone. Different sizes and criticalities and types of environments can require some flexibility, but try to be predictable. Use the same methods and patterns to back up your databases. All Hallengren scripts have been the gold standard of excellence for quite a while. Those are definitely my personal favorite. Minion makes a Minion backup auto job that is popular because, especially if you don't have any DBAs on staff, it can be set to run all your backups from a single job. PowerShell module DBA tools, however, has DBA backup DBA database. If you want to have your backups kicked off from a centralized solution, I would definitely go with DBA tools. If you've got a million different instances and you want to make sure that they're all kicked off from the same server, that's a great way to do it too. Whatever you do though for your initial SQL backup, I'm not talking about replication just yet, just that first initial SQL backup. Use the same tools, use the same naming conventions. Anywhere that you can add some consistency, it's going to make your life easier. Finally, centralize your monitoring. You should be running regular checks on the outcome of your SQL Server jobs anyway. If your backups are kicked off by SQL Server jobs, then this is included in that, but you want to make sure that those jobs are succeeding, ideally in a central location. My first ever database administrator job, I had no experience whatsoever because you could still get jobs like that. I had interviewed for a software developer position, and they also had a database administrator position open, and it sounded cool. So I said, why not? And it's been all downhill from there. But my first real assignment at this job was on a daily basis in the morning. I would go in and go into each instance and expand SQL Server agent, look at the history, and see if I had any failed jobs. And if there were any failed jobs, I had to take those down and put them together in an email and send out an email on the failed jobs. I figured out very quickly that this is kind of tedious and really prone to human error. It's real easy to miss something. So, my first ever SQL script and my first ever SQL agent job was automating the checks that my SQL jobs had succeeded. I used the 4XML path tool, which is really fun, and just put that all into this real pretty HTML, put that into an email, and just automated sending out the job successes and failures for the day. And that was great, but I've since also learned, don't let your database checks rely on the database server to tell you if something is wrong with it. If your server is down, your SQL agent can't tell you something is wrong. It can't tell you itself when something has failed. So this is where I want to introduce you to PowerShell, specifically DBA tools and DBA checks modules as a starter into centralizing your monitoring. If you haven't used PowerShell before, don't be too intimidated by it. Windows PowerShell is a cross-platform task automation solution made up of command line shell, scripting language, and configuration management framework that runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. It's got a decent amount of functionality in Azure SQL, even. I think like 75% of the DBA tools commandlets work in Azure SQL. Don't quote me. But you don't have to be a PowerShell wizard in order to start automating your SQL Server monitoring or to start using these tools with your SQL Server. If you haven't worked in a command line interface much, it can be a little bit intimidating to start, but we've got these two modules to help us, and then we're not also reinventing the wheel. DBA tools and DBA checks are free modules that are written specifically for database management that work by interacting with SMOs or SQL Server management objects. This is anything in your Object Explorer that you can right-click and hit Generate Scripts to script out. Those are SQL management objects. These are designed for programming all aspects of managing SQL Server. So these are pretty great. The scope of what you can do with them is pretty incredible. These are just the categories. These aren't the commands, but these are the categories that are available to us with DBA tools alone. It's absolutely mad. It's fantastic. This is the DBA checks, a picture of some of the DBA checks categories. The way that DBA checks works is it sits on top of DBA tools and has categorized a handful of tests that use the Pester model to basically interrogate your SQL Server instance or list of instances and run these checks comprised of DBA tools commands on them. And to look at our job success, we're going to use this tag failed job in just a second here. So we're not going to go crazy with DBA tools today. I just wanted to give you enough of an intro if you hadn't seen it before to get an idea of what you can do with it. You should absolutely go play with it. But for right now, we're just going to look at how we can use them both to run some ad hoc checks and centrally monitor our database backup job success. One thing I did want to mention, you might need to have a little chat with your cybersecurity team before you're able to fully utilize PowerShell remoting. They are likely to have questions for you. You want to be prepared for this. The good news is that PowerShell remoting is actually quite a bit more secure even than using SSMS or RDP. It has something to do with the token that's created when you're using those tools, but you may still need to justify your reasons for wanting to use this. And this is a great thing. We want to have an engaged cybersecurity team. But if you need to be more prepared for this conversation before it happens, check out dbatools.io/secure. They do a much better job of explaining this. It's just something you want to have in your pocket to anticipate and be ready for before you start using this. I'm not going to talk about this next slide, but this is just here. If you start to try to play with this tool and you can't figure out how to get it up and running, come back and look at this slide. It has some notes that should help you. So for our first demo, let's just test a connection. So we're going to use test DBA connection. Whoop. To my demo environment. This is just going to tell us if we can reach our SQL instance at all. And that'll take a couple seconds. So what we're going to do next is remember that failed job that DBHX has. We're going to use that failed job tag to ask DBHX to run all the tests in the failed job category and see if our jobs succeeded. So our connection success is true. We can go ahead and try this. So invoke. DBC sec. DBC check. Failed job. SQL instance. Localhost. Demo. Cool. So you can see that it called this agent.tests.ps1 script in order to run the failed jobs related tasks. So our system databases job ran fine. User databases job ran fine. Our output file cleanup job failed because I set it to fail so that we could see this error. So that is immediately one way that you can monitor your SQL agent job success and failures remotely without having to go to the SQL instance. So let's introduce our case study. So you've seen how PowerShell can be used to check on our SQL agent jobs for success. Let's talk a little bit how we want to combine PowerShell and T-SQL solutions. Our primary goal here is to take consistent backups. So let's design a solution that fits our criteria for our hypothetical client. Let's say the client prefers to be able to see the backup jobs in SQL Server. This is super common, and this is really important. Especially if you're consulting, you have to be flexible with your backup tools. Remember, you might be comfortable running everything from a single script on one centralized server. Your client might not. Some smaller businesses still only feel comfortable using maintenance plans because of the user interface. That's really not optimal. But even in the case of ancient maintenance plans, we can measure the success or failure centrally. But for today, we're going to use Alla Hallengren's maintenance scripts. So client wants to see their backup jobs in SQL Server. When you go and install Alla Hallengren's maintenance scripts, he's got one script that installs all of the required stored procedures and sets up a bunch of jobs for you. At the top of the script, you've got the opportunity to set default values here for your backup parameters. In other words, you can create your very first template to standardizing your backup strategy. This is one area where, yeah, a lot of SQL instances are probably going to differ, but you can have a default solution already saved. Let's say your company wants to have as a default 2 days of retention. You can set your cleanup time to 48 hours. This is in hours. And if you just save the script like that, whenever you run it, it's already going to be set up like that when you go to schedule your jobs. I've been using Alla scripts for years. They continue to be my favorite solution. Alla is also fantastic and super responsive if you ever have any questions or problems. He's also most recently updated his solution to be compatible with Azure Blob Storage for storing your SQL backups, which is fantastic. So again, running this script automatically sets up unscheduled backup jobs for full diff, log, system databases, database integrity checks, index optimizations. You just have to schedule them. So we've given our client a backup solution that they can see. Let's say they want their retention to be local and also offsite. So they want native SQL backups. They want to keep them local for 2 days. They want to replicate them to a NAS, which let's say retains backups for 7 days. And the backup drive is also captured in third-party snapshots for long-term retention. Let's dive into this into a little bit more detail for just a moment. So here's your SQL Server. Here's your disks. Ideally, you've got dedicated disks for most of these items. Let's talk about ways we can combine snapshot technology with SQL Server. Having a local drive for backups is a contested strategy, really for good reasons. I've even heard people go as far as saying never take SQL backups locally. In the event your server goes down, you probably don't have access to your local backup drive. However, I want to stress that the key here is not only having your SQL backup stored locally. There are a few reasons why I still suggest, if you have the resources, allocating a dedicated backup drive. For one, 90% or more of the restore requests I get are for the most recent full backup. If you have to go hunt that down or restore from a snapshot, it can be a little bit trickier. It's just nice to have. Two, the smallest network blip can fail your initial backup. There's ways to support retries, but not every environment can support the extra time and overhead that's needed to rerun backups. So for that reason, if you have the resources to keep 1 or 2 days of full backups locally, I do recommend provisioning for that. And on successful backup completion, immediately run a step to copy the completed backup files to offsite storage. So here's my NAS or a SAN if you're fancy and have more money. Let's say this is where I want to keep 7 days of full backups. This can be anything you want. This can be Azure Blob Storage. It's another good choice. So how does this work, though, with third-party snapshot solutions? Many, if not most, companies today use some form of snapshot and or machine replication solution on their SQL servers and the rest of their environments. And this is fantastic when done with the full SQL Server backup picture in mind. Again, I mentioned earlier, we want to complement our backup plans and coordinate this hand in hand with our sysadmins and the tooling that they have. Because if we don't, it's easy to break your backup chains, and then you have unpredictable or unreliable results. And then what have you done this backup for if you can't restore? So we see our SQL Server, we see our NAS or our SAN. Let's throw in our snapshot tooling. So we're assuming native SQL backups. So application awareness is off. Instead of taking an image of a whole machine for SQL Server, where we've got dedicated disk drives, it's important here to optimize our storage space that we split out our snapshot by disk. So let's add to our snapshot all of the disks except for tempdb. Remember, tempdb can't be restored. We can also snapshot our backup data on our SAN. That gives us 3 points of redundancy for our SQL backups and 2 for our data and OS. This is solid. One more note that's kind of cool. If you're really short on virtual space and you're confident in your backups because you've hopefully set up backups that meet your restore point objectives and you're checking them, You can even exclude your data and your log drives from your snapshots. If you decide to use this method, I would suggest considering placing your system databases and only your system databases, excluding tempdb, on your C drive. It makes it a little bit easier in the event of a full machine restore to the same machine. We're not going to go over that in too much detail today, but let's get back to our case study. So we have sorted out local and offsite backup replication. Let's say that our RTO is 1 hour. We want to have the whole machine up and running in case of an outage within an hour. Let's say our restore point objective is 15 minutes, which means we only want to lose 15 minutes of data. Let's say some of our backups, or some of our databases rather, are small and they maybe just take a few minutes to restore. Let's say that one of our databases is very large and that database takes an hour to restore from a single backup file. Well, our RTO is 1 hour, right? Not too bad. We install and schedule and run all Hellengren's maintenance scripts. We have a robocopy step that's copying our local backups to a secondary location. Both backup locations are captured by our snapshots. We run a PowerShell script every day to check up that our backup job succeeded and maybe that our integrity check job succeeded. We set log backups to every 15 minutes to meet our RPO. And let's just split that large database into 5 backup files so we can restore that also in under our 1 hour RTO. Done. Right? Can anyone see a problem with this? What if our backups are bad? Our replication strategy is not going to help us out a whole lot here. If our initial SQL backup is bad, now we just have 3 bad geo-redundant replicated backup files. This is where restore testing comes in. So how do we know that our backups are good? How do we know that they continue to be good? We can hope that they are, but I think it's Google that coined hope is not a strategy. How do we know that our backups are good and that they continue to be good? By testing them. Ideally, you can do a full hands-on DR test every so often, but in between DR testing, you should, of course, be checking your backup integrity as part of all of scripts or equivalent use of DBCC check DB. You can use the physical only option for extremely large databases, but also by confirming that your backup files actually restore successfully when you go to restore them. So you need to be running your integrity check jobs. We need to be checking that all backup related jobs succeed. Again, this is not just backups, but your backup and say your backup integrity check jobs are succeeding. And then regularly restore test your backups. We can automate this too with DBC checks. One quick note on automating PowerShell tasks. You can run these from SQL Server jobs, but if you do, make sure that you're saving your PowerShell as a script and then having SQL Server call the script, because the version of PowerShell that is shipped with SQL Server is not always what you want and is not compatible with the latest versions of PowerShell. You can, of course, also schedule your PowerShell scripts to be kicked off by Windows tasks, however you want to do it. But if you use SQL Server agent jobs, make sure you do it in the form of a script. So let's demo this. So instead of checking that our job succeeded, let's just run a whole check on our backups. Using the backup tag of DBA checks. There's a lot more here now. So what you're seeing is it's running verify only tests of last backups. It located a backup file for AdventureWorks 2022. It did a restore verify only, reporting success. It's done this for our system DBs. Uh-oh, Stack Overflow 2010 should be success, but there's no backup file. So let me go ahead and let's take a backup. This is the DBA tools command. Backup DBA database, SQL instance, localhost, database, and we want Stack Overflow 2010. Now, if I put nothing else here, it's just going to assume I want a full backup. So let's just run that real quick. Cool. Let's try that again. It's found a file for our Stack Overflow backup, and now it's running the verification test on it. Cool. So the other errors that you see up here but don't see now, your policies are all configurable within DBA checks. And I'm not going to go into detail there, but there's a set config that lets you say, I don't want to have log backups older than 15 minutes. And then it will check for that, or 20 minutes. You can go in and configure just about anything you can think of there. But now we've got a successful backup. So what if I want to centrally monitor the outcome of my backup testing? DBA Checks has a PowerShell template that it's set up to automatically put your data into. So let's see, I'm just going to copy paste this one. So when your boss asks, what the heck are you doing? You're able to actually show them, hey, this is the status of our backups. All right, so we just wrote the results of our backup check to a JSON file. Let's see what this does. One quick note, whenever you run the DBA checks Power BI model, you have to hit refresh. Don't be scared by the default data that's in there. You're probably connected just fine. But now we're on our localhost demo environment. And because we ran the new backup for our Stack Overflow database, we've got no failures. Cool. So I highly recommend you to play around with the PowerShell that DBA Checks has for you. It can hold so much more data than just the backups. Anything that you can run a DBC check with, you can output to a PowerShell module. You can separate it by environment. It's really, really great stuff, and it's great for communicating the status of your many, many environments in one place to whoever you want. Don't save. Okay, so let's go back to our case study again. All right. So now we've also verified our backups with DBC checks. As a disclaimer, I highly recommend to anyone who has the space to also be regularly manually completing restore tasks for a couple of reasons. If you have the resources, I would even build a server just for this purpose. Any occasional spot testing is supplemental testing. This is a more is more situation, and it's just good practice. It's something that you should be comfortable with, even if you don't get asked to do it a whole lot. And if you do build a dedicated restore testing server, you can absolutely automate actually restoring your databases in addition to the verify only method we used in this demo. So how about that? Are we done? That's a pretty good start, right? Can you think of any situation in which this might have some cracks in it? This is a a frequently overlooked facet of DR preparedness or having a solid backup strategy or part of someone's DR playbook. Generating and maintaining DR materials, and what I mean by that is restore scripts mostly. Included in your DR playbook, along with your prioritized SQL servers and your backup notes and anything else that you would need to reference or run in order to build your SQL server from scratch, is something that you want to have on hand. So if your server is a complete loss, you also want to have scripts ready to restore things that are not part of your database backup files. We alluded to this briefly before. This is your configuration and your SMOs. So logins, link servers, jobs, just restoring your backup files is not going to bring those back for you if you have to move to a new server. Again, this is anything that you can do the right click and generate scripts on. DBA tools can script that for you. DBA tools can also script your configuration, which is not a SQL management object. So that's kind of special too. DBA tools can do or automate pretty much anything that you want it to do, aside from maybe restore the master database, because that is not a consistent enough process to automate. And remember, we need consistency in order to have successful automation. This is one thing that the Minion backup tool does well. It does have a restore script publishing functionality, but it can also be done with purely DBA tools, which is my preference. I think you should be using DBA tools anyway, so we're going to do it with DBA tools today. So you should be generating your restore scripts regularly and either adding restore scripts to your backup retention policy and or really saving updated scripts into version control. Version control is something that is, I feel, really frequently overlooked, specifically with SQL Server. And it's absolutely, I think, invaluable to have in situations with high criticality environments or fast moving environments. It's more than just having backups. Being able to look back and see changes without having to do restores or custom queries is super useful. So let's go into our next demo. So let's just see an SMO. Let's pull logins. So get DBA login, because when I restore my database, I'm going to have the user that the database has, but I'm not necessarily going to have the instance level, instance context login that is required for my database user to function. Cool. We can see all the logins. Jordan, that's great, but that looks like a lot of work. It's cool to have the documentation, but now I got to script all that out. That's what export is for. So for all of your SMOs, there is also an export command that DBA Tools has that is going to put this in the form of a script that you can run in order to restore. Let me get my path here. In order to restore your logins in a form that you can just pull up and run. All right, I've got the script. I'm going to pull it up over here. Take a look at this. See if I can zoom in. So it's got my demo user. It's added the roles at a server context level. It checks if my users are created, and if not, it recreates them. It reassigns the roles and permissions and securables that the user needed. and we didn't have to do anything. So keeping scripts like this handy for your DR is huge, because you're not automatically going to have all of this restored should you have to move to a fresh environment and stand up a new server because you had a total server loss and you just restored your backups. So let's look at configuration, because configuration values are not technically server management objects, but we can do that too with DBA tools. Get DBA, SP configure. Once again, it's listed them out. That's really, really cool to see. You can put it in different formats. You can output it to a clipboard, whatever you want, just for prosperity. But we want to have a script that we can run. So we also have an export for this command. Let's see what that guy looks like. Check that out. This saves you so much time digging through documentation and picking off settings one at a time when you have to rebuild a server from scratch. This lets you have a policy of cattle, not pets, with your servers, so that when your Snowflake server dies, you're not stuck and dead in the water until you figure out how to stand him back up. You've got scripts handy. You are prepared for anything. So back to our case study. Now, the last task in our case study was to generate scripts to restore SQL configuration and objects that are not necessarily included in our database backup files, to make sure that we can restore to a completely new server in the event of a disaster. Or maybe you just want to see the version of a stored procedure from last Tuesday, and you don't want to, or you can't restore the 40 terabyte database backup in order to do that. Version control here is your friend. So in summary, what do we cover today? For our case study, we automated and standardized our backups with all Halogren's maintenance scripts to meet our client's specific goals. We coordinated with our sysadmins, our replication strategy, and we checked our RTO and RPO against our backup strategy. We checked our backup job success, and we also tested a restore of our database using DBA tools. We saw how we can monitor our backups and our backup health with DBA checks and DBA checks Power BI dashboard. We use DBA tools again to generate our instances, SMOs, and our configuration in the event that we need to completely recreate our SQL Server. We know now what we need to include in our DR playbook so that we can run our playbooks at 2 a.m. without caffeine and still meet business requirements and expectations. So I hope this session has given you some more confidence in your ability to improve on your existing backup solution, or to architect a bulletproof new solution for SQL Server backups for you or for your clients. If you want a deeper dive into DBA tools or PowerShell in general, I highly, highly recommend the Learn in a Month of Lunches books. These are great. They break things down in an easy, digestible fashion, and they have a lot of information. I've also included links for some of the tools that we've used today. And I will be uploading the slides and materials presented today on my GitHub shortly after the presentation. The repository will be Automate Robust Backups. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions so far, but if anybody has any, actually, there's one that just came in. What should we do if our backup job does not complete or fail in the middle? It's a 14-hour runtime with a full backup of more than 4 terabytes of data.
So if your backup job is not completing, there's a couple things that I would look at. For one, is it's why is your backup not completing? Is your backup completing because you're copying it to a remote destination and your network hiccuped for a second? Is it not completing because you're trying to back up, I think you said 14 terabytes, a 14 terabyte backup to a single backup file? That's going to take longer and take more resources than, say, if you were to split that database file into a handful of backup files. If you stripe your backup, you might have a little bit more success with getting that finished. You can implement a retry functionality, but a lot of it depends on how your backup is set up to be able to answer that more specifically.
Is DBA tools compatible with SQL managed instance up in Azure?
I want to say somewhere between 70 and 75%. Don't ask me which commands, but I do know that that's something that they're actively working on. This is an open source tool, but it's unique in that it is actually funded by Microsoft's free and open source software fund. So there are people that are being compensated to maintain and update and add to DBA tools. So while there might be 70, 75% compatibility with managed instances now, that is something that they're still working on.
And it's always a work in progress because
Yeah.
the cloud keeps changing every single day.
Oh, every day, every day.
I have a question for you. Let's say
Sure.
an organization has not fully set in concrete the RPO and RTO. How do you start that conversation with them?
So what I usually do is I query what they have now. I query the jobs and I query the schedules for whatever backup mechanism that they have in place already. I do a little math and figure out what is the configured functional RTO and RPO values that we have, and then I take that data, put it together, and I present it to the stakeholders and say, "This is what you've got configured. Does this meet your needs?" Because you're going to get a lot of, if you just ask someone, what do you want for your retention policy? What do you want for your RTO? They might not totally understand or totally know what that means, but it's your job to present them with what is working now. Say, you've got transaction logs every 20 minutes. What this means is at any point in time, if this goes down, you're going to lose 20 minutes of data. Is that okay with you? And a lot of times you might get, no, we can't lose any data. And that's a different conversation. But if they say, 15 minutes is okay, then you make an adjustment there, you document it, and you publish it, and you revisit that.
Very cool. That's how I spend about a third of my week right
Oh,
there.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's fun. Does anybody else have any other questions? And if you do, drop in the chat window or come off of mute. And if you're watching this after the fact, do not hesitate to reach out. Uh, Ask any questions. You've got our contact info right there. You've got ours with the virtual group. So we're here to help. No marketing, no sales pitch, none of that. It's just we're geeks and we want to help.
I have a question. Is this presentation going to be, the recording will be available online later?
100%. It will be on the YouTube channel for our virtual group by the time I go to bed tonight, if not sooner.
Okay, cool. So how to access that YouTube?
If you go to the meetup group, the link is on there, but I'll find it right now and I will actually drop it in the chat window here for you. And I think there's actually a Zoom problem and I can't send a message to every single person out there. It goes to a certain person. But if you go out to Meetup and look up Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group and go to the About tab, there is a YouTube link in the description up there.
Okay, excellent. And my second question is, we're the data team, not really the backup team. So we rely on the backup admin, the network team, to perform their job. But what happened is recently, when we lost data and we need to recover from that backup, we realized the backup was not really generated correctly. And so how to build that trust or peace of mind with our network team to make sure either we can access that file or we should what's the best communication way, or we receive an email if something's failed, because they know the job was running and it never showed the fail message. However, the correct file had never been fully written out.
Yeah, so this is kind of twofold. Again, I really want to stress that setting up your backup strategy is a team effort. This is something that should be a two-way communication. You give your needs to your network team or your sysadmins, and they should be able to communicate with you. Hey, this is what's in place. You need to speak up if you want to have failure notifications on a snapshot backup, for example. Um, and you also need to tell them, hey, this is what we need in terms of backup retention and our policies, but also how can we set up, I don't know if you have a multi-part backup solution or not, but how can we work with you to make sure that we're running backups that meet our needs and are something that you're able to do.
There's a phrase that I use. It's simply trust but verify.
Hmm.
I trust that they're doing the backups correctly, but periodically I need to verify just to make sure that everything is okay. Because
Yeah,
sometimes
and
their
don't
tools,
assume.
exactly, don't assume
Don't
anything
assume anything.
because it's your job on the line and your
Yeah.
business is on the line.
Right, yeah. But like they don't give us full permission on those information sometimes. So
So escalate up and say,
Hmm.
we need the ability to retrieve those backups and test them periodically. And if they won't provide that, continue to escalate. It's that simple.
Yeah. So
okay.
if this is something that they're actively not giving you permissions to, then they're saying that it is their liability. So they're liable for these issues because they have decidedly locked you out of that. This can be okay. You don't want to have liability for things that you're not comfortable with or you should have on your plate. But also that puts the onus on them.
Yep, good advice. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else have any questions? And I don't see any more. So thank you very much. That was outstanding. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, do not hesitate. Reach out if you have any questions with this stuff. Thank you all, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much.